Hey guys, hope you're doing well. I hope you enjoyed your prom and had fun, but not too much fun. This is chapter 52. We are moving away from the study of the organism itself, like the body systems. We were using a human, of course, as our example, but you could be talking about almost any mammalian or chordate type body system there. So we're going to move away from that. We're going to kind of broaden our horizons just a little bit. We're going to start talking a bit about ecology and how organisms live together with their environment, how they interact, how energy flows between organisms and the environment. So this is chapter 52, an introduction to ecology and the biosphere. This chapter 52 would not be in quiz number 6, which is coming up this weekend, but it would be part of exam number 3. So you'll notice that I didn't do a vodcast for all of these little excerpt chapters. So all of the chapters on the human body systems, like the nervous system, skeletal system, muscular system, we did take some excerpts from some of those chapters, but we didn't cover the whole chapter, and so I'm not going to do a vodcast over each one of those excerpt chapters. I would expect you to take a look at the notes that I put up on the Schoology website, as well as the crash course videos. That'll kind of help you hit that information. Most of that information is a bit of review from what you probably have already studied in freshman biology, or perhaps even as a middle school student in 7th grade, which was heavy on biology. So let's get started on chapter 52 here, an introduction to ecology and the biosphere, and we'll talk about how all these living creatures work together to form these systems that we might consider that not only take into account the living part, but also the abiotic or non-living environment as well. As usual, we need to start by defining a couple of terms. So our overview talks about what does ecology mean. The word ecology is the scientific study of the interactions between organisms and their environment. So we're going to talk about how different creatures interact with each other, as well as their non-living environment. So food chains and habitats, things of that nature. These interactions determine the distribution of organisms and their abundance in our world. And modern ecology includes observations, which in the past really would have been all of ecology, was simply going out in the field and observing living creatures. So I think about, for example, some of the scientists who went out and observed the orangutans and chimpanzees and gorillas and the like, Diane Fossey and some of those researchers who have gone out and studied those types of creatures. They did a lot of observation, but they didn't really do a lot of experimentation. Well, modern ecology mixes both observation as well as lab setting sort of experimentation. And ecology really strives to help explain things like, why have multiple species of frogs suddenly begin to have gone extinct, or their populations have really seriously declined just in the last, say, 30 years, since the 1980s. Why are there mosquitoes pretty much all over the world, but we are losing other species like rhinos? Why are they almost being wiped out? So it's really a complex issue, this interplay of living creatures in the environment, and that's what ecology tries to get down and learn about and study. Your textbook shows this good example of this harlequin toad that was rediscovered in Costa Rica many years after most scientists thought that it had been wiped out, that it was extinct. So this raises some ecological questions about what are the environmental factors that limit this toad's distribution throughout the world, and what are some of the other factors like food and pathogens that have affected its population size. Because at one time, this little guy right here, this frog, had a fairly healthy, large population, and that population then began to dwindle quite a bit, to the point where scientists couldn't find any of them and thought they were extinct. And now recently they've been rediscovered. A small population has been rediscovered, and of course, if we can, we would like to try to help that population and to make sure that it survives, but we have to know a lot more about it to ensure its success. If you're going to be an ecologist or you're going to study ecology, there's a lot of different ways to do it, and you can do it at a lot of different levels. Ecologists work at levels that range from studying individual creatures or individual species of creatures all the way up to studying the entire Earth and all of its systems and living creatures. So it kind of depends on what layer or level do you want to look at. Recall that when we discussed organizational levels of, say, a human body, we're very good in science and as human beings of organizing things and putting them in hierarchies and layers and levels. So if we were going to look at, say, the human body, starting with the lowest level of life, we would talk about a single cell, and then we would move up to tissues and organ systems, and then the complete whole organism. Well, you can do the same thing in ecology, starting with a single creature, which would have been the largest section of this layering, and then moving up from there. If you want to look on text page 1145, it does a good job of kind of showing you a picture as well as kind of describing these different levels of the hierarchy of ecology. So here are some of the levels. We would start with maybe a single creature, and we could work our way up into the entire planet. So we could look at an organism, organismal ecology. We could look at a population, a community, an ecosystem, an entire landscape, or the entire globe. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually start at the top. What is the largest layer or the largest level that we could look at? And then we'll kind of work our way down to the single individual creature. If you want to go as big picture as you can, you know I'm always harping on this big picture and the big ideas. Well, in ecology, if you want to go as big as you can, you would study the entire Earth as one entire large system. And you would talk about the biosphere, which is the global ecosystem of all of the possible land formations and ocean formations and habitats and living creatures, the non-living portions such as the soil and the air and the weather, as well as all of the living creatures. That would be as big picture as you're going to get. And we call that the biosphere. It's the sum of all of the planet's ecosystems. And global ecology examines how all of these various parts work together and affect each other across the entire planet. And that's as big picture as you can get. That is the really big picture. So if you want to look at the entire Earth, you're studying the biosphere and you're learning about global ecology. Now, one step down from that, if we start to break the Earth into chunks, we might look at what we call a landscape. A landscape, or if we're talking about an aquatic environment, a seascape, is sort of a mosaic of connected ecosystems. So we're talking about large sections of the Earth made up of multiple ecosystems that kind of interplay and work together. Landscape ecology focuses on how energy flows and material flows from one part of the world to another, from one type of living creature to another, across multiple ecosystems. So if we were to look at, say, the landscape of, say, the interplay between where a river meets the ocean and all of the surrounding land around that, that might be considered a good example of landscape ecology. Going down one step from that, we get to what we call an ecosystem. An ecosystem is a particular community of organisms in a fairly smaller area and the physical factors in which they interact. So for example, where I live in East Texas around Tyler, we might talk about a pine forest ecosystem, and that would include all the different types of living creatures that live in that pine forest, as well as the plants and the animals, and including the abiotic factors like the land, the climate, the weather, the amount of rainfall, the type of soil. That is an ecosystem. Ecosystem ecology emphasizes, again, energy flow between the creatures and how certain chemical nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus, how they are cycled and recycled throughout that environment. And this is going to look at, again, both biotic and abiotic factors. Biotic meaning the living creatures or the living parts of the ecosystem, and abiotic being the non-living, such as weather, soil, and the like. So here is a grassland ecosystem, and if you were going to study the grasslands of, say, Nebraska, you would study all of the living and non-living parts that make up that particular area or part of Nebraska. One step down from that, we talk about a community. A community is just the living portions of one particular area, a group of populations. So again, if we were going to look at, say, the East Texas pine forest ecosystem, we would only be talking about the living portions of that East Texas pine forest. If we're talking about a community, we're only going to talk about the grasshoppers and the bunny rabbits and the pine trees and the rabbits. We're not really going to take into account all of the abiotic factors. So community deals with only the biotic creatures, the populations of different creatures that live there. And it talks about things like food chains and energy flow between the living creatures. So we could look at, say, the ecology of a rainforest, and we would only be talking about the living portions of the rainforest, the ferns, trees, plants, insects, snakes, and the like. And food chains, when we discuss food chains, we're really looking at things at a community level. Now we could go down smaller than that. We could look at a particular population. A population is a group of individuals of the same species living in a particular area. So a population focuses on one type of living creature. If we were going to go back to that Nebraska grassland, we would only look at, say, just the buffalo or maybe just the grasshoppers. So we're looking at one particular species, one group of those creatures that we call a population. Like if you notice in any city or town, you come into the town and there's a sign that gives the name of the town and it says population. And that number is only numbering and measuring the number of humans that live in that area. It's not taking into account the number of dogs and grasshoppers and cows. That number only represents one species, and that would be the humans. Finally, we get down to as small as we can go when we're talking about ecology, and that would be the individual creature. Organismal ecology studies how one particular organism's structure and biology and physiology and its behavior meets its environmental challenges. So how does this one particular creature interact with its environment and behave and survive and reproduce and do everything it needs to do to keep the species going. So organismal ecology includes physiology and evolutionary and behavioral ecology, the study of, say, this one particular shark or type of shark, how it interacts with its environment and interacts with the other creatures around it. So you might study hammerhead sharks and how they mate, or how they raise their young, or how they best find food, and that would be at the smallest level, the single organism. This one particular shark, sorry about that, this one particular shark we are using as our study subject in that form of ecology. So we'll take a break right there. Just like with all of the types of science or areas of biology we've already studied, ecology is kind of a big picture, and it's an overall view of animals and their environment, or living creatures and their environment, but it still can be divided and subdivided into categories and hierarchies. And again, science is really good at subdividing and dividing and categorizing things, and we have done that throughout this entire semester, including last semester, and we'll continue to do that. But let's take a look at ecology just a little bit more. Next, we're going to talk about the Earth's climate and how the Earth is divided into different areas based on its long-term weather conditions, and that would be called climate. We'll take a break. We'll be right back.